Okay, so for some of you guys who've been watching, a lot of information on this one. Normally, I don't do these kind of salty mic, sit down and assess what's going on. But since, for me, I'm going to explain what exactly was talked about today, and we're going to break it down. And I'm going to explain exactly what they mean by some of these things that they talked about. And I'm going to draw it out for you guys so that there's no confusion. So we're going to go through, and then when they say or make a point, I'm going to draw it out and explain it so that you guys have visual representation of what's going on and give my opinion as to how right or how wrong they're talking about stuff.
Sometimes so broken, but yeah, stuff like that.
Okay. Rich.
Yeah, so I'm basically Richard and I'm the lead game designer on the vehicle experience team. So I'm kind of responsible with Yogi for the overall flight experience, turrets.
You're the one. This man.
Just the way the general gameplay works with vehicles.
This man brought us master modes.
I noticed you hid your last name so people can't send you letters.
Yeah.
This is Rich Tyrer sitting here.
Right, I'm going to start making loads of decisions now.
I like his shirt.
StarCitizen these days, and yeah, that's what we do.
All right. So as we want to do on StarCitizen Live, we put a thread up on Spectrum where this one. So I'm talking to the people. We put a thread up on Spectrum and collected questions from you, the StarCitizen community. Our lovely folks here, went through your questions and pulled a collection of them that they felt they could answer best during the course of today's show.
The non-hard questions.
So if you've submitted your question,
translation, the ones that marketing said they could answer.
Okay, look. I think if we all just take a couple of deep breaths here and just try to...
Fuck! You're like, well, why aren't they talking about this and why aren't they talking about that? Usually what that means is either we don't have the particular guest that's on to talk about that, because we certainly wouldn't want Yogi talking about stuff he's not involved in, or Matei or Rich, or that's a feature aspect that is not currently in development. The other big kind of misperception in games is that you work on all the things all at the same time. We don't. So the questions that we're going to talk about today are primarily the things that are currently in active development and that relate to the work of these three individuals. So right off the bat, we'll just jump right in. Yo, Jared, looking healthy as... Oh. Thank you, Boomish. True. Thought it was my mom at first. What is the intended purpose for heavy fighters? Right now, they have a turn rate very similar to ships like the Connie and Corsair, but they lack the shields and firepower of those. What's up?
Yeah, what is up, guys?
This is a question for me, yes. We have been playing with heavy fighter tuning since 3.23, basically the master mode release, and our idea about the heavy fighter role hasn't changed much throughout the time. So basically, we think an heavy fighter is basically heavier fighter that has lower maneuverability compared to light fighters, but increased durability and increased firepower. That's as simple as that, right? Currently, we have retuned the entire heavy fighter class that includes ships like the F8, the New Guardian, the other Guardians, and so on and so forth, to fit a better spot. And in our opinion, the spot that now the heavy fighters actually cover, it's quite fine. We do notice that the heavy fighter class is slightly underperforming right now, though, but we think it's related more to the relation.
Slightly underperforming.
In between cross-class.
Oh, God help me.
Rather than the heavy fighters tuning per se. So stuff, for example, like how the heavy fighter is dealing against like a medium fighter, for example, or a ship of a bigger size, like for example a Constellation or stuff like that. So we would like to dive more into the tuning for other classes first before assessing the the overall heavy fighter tuning, and if that need to be addressed once again. So currently this is the state of the heavy fighter class in general, but we have some even more updates or like more ideas for the
more updates.
Updated flight model.
So the current ratio on where the fighters sit doesn't necessarily need to stay this way. We have the updated flight model coming, and we're using that to basically, I wouldn't say reset, but reevaluate, especially the relationships between the fighters. For example, in our perspective at the moment, with the new or with the updated flight model, the heavy fighters, they just feel a little bit too tanky because they're still fighters, right? So we're currently evaluating whether or not we should make them more vulnerable, because if you compare some numbers from, for example, like heavy fighters, they just feel a little bit too tanky because they're still fighters, right? So we're currently evaluating whether
That is not true.
or not we should make them more vulnerable, because if you compare some numbers from, for example, like Gladius versus a F8, we're looking at like a 5 times health.
Oh, here we go with numbers again. So, and I mean this with no disrespect, but the health pool of a Vanguard is much higher than a light fighter. But the problem we have in the current build of the game, and the previous build of the game, and the previous build of the game, and the previous build of the game, is that heavy fighters cannot avoid fire. And so if you are unable to avoid fire, you take full damage, which in turn gets you killed significantly faster than a light medium fighter, to the point where the time to kill is measured in less than a minute for most heavy fighters, and the time to kill for lights fighters is anywhere up to, 30 minutes to an hour if you can't hit the guy. So the idea that they're too tanky is so far disconnected from the reality, I don't know what to say. Maybe this is the case for newer players that are brand new to the game, but for anybody else that has basic competence or the higher level players, that is so far from the truth, it's not even funny.
Health, that is like quite a lot for a fighter class, so we're evaluating or reevaluate that once the new flight.
Heavy fighters need to have the ability to avoid fire. And the only way for them to do that is to be able to somehow disengage from lights and medium fighters. If you create a fighter that is much larger and much heavier, and that does not have the ability to disengage from a situation, to recharge its shields, or to reset the fight in any way, the heavy fighter will always be victim to getting wolf-packed or just losing the duel because it's got a low turn rate. The heavy fighter has nothing other than tankiness and DPS. And in a movement-based system like a dogfighting system where ships are fighting for position and they're avoiding each other, heavy fighters are the epitome of everything that you don't want to design in a fighter. Okay? So if I was CIG, because again, I can complain about it, but I'm going to give you a solution. My solution to heavy fighters has always been, and I'm trying to explain this to Sig, so this is the 5th time now in the last 5 years that I've brought this up. Heavy fighters need to be able to disengage from light fighters. Only way to do that is to keep their turn rates lower, but their main thrust and acceleration higher than the lights around them. So a Hurricane should be able to main thrust, push away from a light fighter gang, whereas something like a Vanguard, same thing, right? So you have a Vanguard, half of the ship is engine. Literally half of the ship is massive engines, and you're telling me that that thing can't push forward? You're not getting into turn fights because the Vanguard doesn't have the turn rate to do it, neither does the Hurricane. And you're not going to be able to sit there and just trade all day, because eventually you're just going to run out of health points. So the only chance a heavy fighter has, and which we saw a little bit of in the previous flight model, because the top speeds of the Hurricanes were high enough and the acceleration was high enough that it could actually create extensions. The Hurricane in the previous flight model was actually viable, but in master modes, because everything has been condensed down so that it's easier for the general masses to experience cinematic combat, what you've done is you've made the problem of the heavy fighters magnified to the 10th degree. And then to say that they're not, like they're too tanky, is is just, I don't know where that comes from, but that is so far from the truth. But if you want to fix heavy fighters, you got to give heavy fighters more main thrust than all of their other counterparts. They don't have to win turn fights. They don't have to be able to have super responsiveness. That's fine. The heavy fighter should be a zoom and boom type ship. Just like how the interceptors play in the current master modes, they need to be able to dive in, apply their damage, and bring their energy out of the fight while light fighters try to get on them, and their turret spins to 6 o'clock to push them away as they leave the fight, and they reset the fight, come back in, get their shields back, that kind of stuff. That's the only way you're going to make heavy fighters viable. If you don't do that, you're going to have to make the physical size of heavy fighters pretty much the size of a light fighter, because you're not going to be able, you just won't be able to make that work. It's just not going to happen.
Flight model, or the updated flight model is coming online.
And when you say evaluate, that means you're still making your decisions.
Yeah, sure.
about stuff.
Nothing is ever set in stone when it comes to that. Yeah.
You're asking the question whether that 5 times is right. You're not sitting here saying today 5 times is wrong.
No.
We're still looking at that. And Mattia, you make a good point about how you don't just, in order to tune the heavy fighters or any fighter class or any ship class, it's not just the work on that ship. You then have to make a pass on everything else. It's this constant kind of thing where you go through every class and then you go back through and you go through every class, then you go back through every class, and you just refine the entire field of ships over and over again. And that's where you're going to find out whether 5 times is right, maybe 5 times is right, and then things like the Connie and Cutlass need to go up to 6 or 7 or whatever. It's one of those things you're going to find it through multiple passes, which is what you guys have been doing for some time now, for being candid about it.
I mean, we can never really set it to a fixed thing. Like, we can plan as much as we want, but whether our plans survive then reality is a different question. Also, like, sometimes other things coming, for example, the upcoming armor system and so on, that will also change these dynamics and might just require some other adjustments somewhere else.
I imagine your thoughts on these things actually change over time too. Like, how many years have you been here now, Yogi?
Eight?
Yeah, it's close to me. I'm on 11, and I can't remember a time when you weren't here.
I joined 2017, but gameplay since 2019, I think. Yeah.
So, I'm certain the way you thought about some of these things in 2017 is not the same as you thought of them in 2020. It's not the same you thought. I'm sure there are some things that are still the same.
Well, yeah,
but
I think details change over time a bit, right? Because sometimes you just prove that A or B doesn't really work. For example, also the idea to have a perfectly balanced game is a bit. This can be. Sure, we can go for this, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that, because the relationships of players playing, they're so complex to grasp. The hardest case we have in our combat design is same skill, same pilot, same skill, same ship. To get a fight going in a 1v1 scenario without any other external factors. This is like, when you get this one right, then you probably have something that you can really work with.
Look, I'm not trying to be Mr. Negative, but they literally had that. You had it. And then you just said, oh, we could work with that. And what did CIG do? They took it, they packaged it up, they put a little bow tie on it, and they threw it out the window. That's what they did.
But it's hard to actually get to that thing, because even if you have two really good pro players fighting against each other, it's hard to tell which one of these is better. I mean, you can maybe hard to grab.
I'm not trying to be a prick. It's just so much of this is just wrong.
So I'm not entirely sure that we need a completely balanced game, because ships are different. Like, people are different, real-world airplanes are different, have pros and cons and so on. But you can never really balance them out completely, right? So we'll see.
Well, you've just given people their first Reddit thread. We start CIG developers. I'm not sure we need a completely balanced game.
So hang on. What we're still aiming for is, like, we try to avoid a meta game, right? This is like something we're still trying. It will be incredibly hard, but if we have a game at some point where like almost all ship types have a purpose, where it makes sense, also like maybe in the value that you bought that ship for.
I'm sorry, I have to talk about this. Try to avoid a meta game. So that is an impossible task because there will always be a perceived meta, even if there isn't a meta, which will create a meta, right? So, how do I say it this way? Meta stands for most effective tool available, right? A lot of people don't know that, right? And what this is saying is they say, I don't want to make a meta, and then they go right ahead and say, we want to put ships in roles so that they're good for their exact things. So what they're really saying is, we don't want a meta, so we're just going to make metas for all these different other little things. So there's metas within metas, which is like turbo metas. Like now you have turbo metas everywhere you go. And so I just sometimes when they say stuff like this, it makes me so frustrated because it just feels like there's some kind of disconnect going on. You know what I mean? And it's just not, something's not connecting here because they're talking about design and they're talking about they don't want a meta, and then they go ahead and make a game that literally promotes metas, and then they say, well, we don't want to balance the game. Everything's going to be in different levels. Like an Aurora is not going to be balanced against a Mark II Hornet and blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
The in-game shop or something like that.
And I can't tell whether that is someone on the management team or a game designer, or I don't know whose choice or decision it is, but they say they don't want to make a meta game, but they are literally designing the most meta type game that you could build.
Then we're probably...
And then they're sticking these meta things behind paywalls like Blades, which is a totally different topic that I will surely have an aneurysm talking about.
In a good place.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's some ships are meant to be. There's progression in mind. It's not every ship is supposed to be equal. Some ships you're supposed to progress through.
Yeah.
You know, a Gladius is where the light fighter journey starts. It's not where your light fighter journey is supposed to end.
Sure.
And stuff like that. So you have to. So just by the very concept of progression, not all ships can be balanced. Nor should they. They're supposed to be you start here and you move here and you move here. Now, that has changed quite a bit over the years, and it will continue to change as the game continues to develop. There was one more thing I wanted to follow up on and stuff, and I lost it because there was a guy in the Twitch chat who's like, "CRG's a joke" and whatever, and I was just like, I'm like.
Yeah, those kinds of people that are just highly negative all the time, guys, please don't bring it into this chat. Please don't bring it into this community. I like to bag on CIG, but I genuinely love them and I love the game. We're trying to actually solve these problems, not just sit here and wank off about how we hate CIG. If that's your vibe, there are other streamers for you. But like, we are here to solve problems and to do it in a way that's going to actually get that done. So if you're one of those folks that's just highly negative all the time, like just either don't say nothing and just chill out, drink your beer, say they took her gerbs, but just thanks
for watching. Let's just move on to the next question, and if I remember it, I'll come back. What happened with the new quantum travel experience that we saw at CitizenCon 2953, so 2 years ago?
Okay, so at
That's the one where I was doing the tournament live.
this point, the quantum experience that you saw there was exactly how it was at the time in Squadron 42. That design since then has changed a bit. Also with the requirements of the other flight model changes that we're currently doing. So in general, there's three parts to the new flight model. It's like the quantum experience, the updated space flight model, and the control surfaces. And all of these got changed and expanded based on the requirements that we saw. And right now, what we back then described as quantum boosting is basically has changed a little bit. So quantum boosting will be used for like the slow speed range that you used to do nav mode with, right? So if you want to go there's basically three speed ranges that you need in StarCitizen. One is to go from, let's say, one POI to another, or between planets or something like this, like where we're talking millions of kilometers, right? Then you need the range in which you're navigating within these spaces. So let's say going from, let's say you have a bubble of like 300 kilometers or so in size. You need to navigate in between there, but you don't want to fly with your SCM speeds, right? So for that, quantum boosting will be used. And then there's normal SCM speed region. So basically the thruster-based flying, which will still be limited to, I don't know, maybe 300 meters per second or so. It was real.
Here's a fun question. The F8. Will the F-8 ever once more become a mobility monster? Like it was built in Squadron 42 Prologue. As of the current moment, it feels like a flying brick and with all the agility of one. Rich, what the hell are you doing to my baby? That's what it says.
Yeah, Rich.
Is that what it says?
That's what it says.
Oh, no.
I'm just reading.
I got to see, especially added the last little part.
Yep. So it's about providing a tuning that fits the archetype of that ship, and that's something we're always working towards, is giving the ship the archetype, and it's and I said it's always work in progress. And that ship in particular it's got loads of guns, it's got loads of thrusters, and as you say, not all ships have to fit the perfect progression of balance, and that's in that sense. So we're definitely looking at what the ship should be with a new flight model as well. There's going to
So they don't even know. They don't even know what it's supposed to be. This is the frustrating part. It's like, again, I'm not trying to be negative, but it's like, let's see what he has to say.
be some more changes there, because a big thing with the new flight model is we're going to have far more tools at our disposal to make ships different. Whereas at the moment we've got tools.
Okay, I see what's going on. So it sounds like they're trying to make the flight model less restrictive, which is good, right? And allow players to tune all that stuff. And then when some ships break out of the mold and start running away with a meta, they start bringing it back in. So they're going to just shotgun approach this and let the players basically find the metas by beating the crap out of each other. And then they're going to try to tune everything down as things go on, which is not a terrible idea, but this is what I was saying before. Like if you want to make heavy fighters the ships that they're meant to be, essentially you have to make heavy fighters, able to disengage against light fighters. So they need to have higher top speeds. So you need to give heavy fighters immense amounts of thrust. You don't have to give them tons of great turn rate and have them super responsive, all that stuff. That's all light fighters, right? Light fighters want to get close to you and spin around you, and so you can't hit them. But the heavy fighters should be, in my opinion, they should be the high energy, gliding in at high speed, using a lot of main thrust, exactly like how interceptors kind of play now. To me, that just makes sense,
But we're quite limited in that context of providing ships that are quick but are sluggish at the same time. So we kind of, we're kind of in a box with the current balance a little bit in that regard. But with the new flight model,
and that's because of master modes. That is something that we told you guys. See, this is why I get negative sometimes, right? I'm glad they figured it out. I'm not being negative.
got more
I'm glad they figured it out.
tools to give.
But we fucking told you.
Is maybe a ship that can be really quick, but actually takes a little bit longer to get there. Or the acceleration is a little bit slower, but it can move, faster.
I do want to. You want anything you want to add, Mateo?
So we do know that at the current state, the overall heavy fighter angular velocities got decreased a little bit, but we think it's for the better. And once again, we think the feeling and the perception that we see on the player side these days is mostly related to, once again, the relation between those ship classes, right? And in our opinion, once again, what we want to reach is like a balanced and intended gameplay experience for the ship per se, right? So having a super OP, mega powerful ship, can be cool the first time that you have it, right? But after a while, when it becomes the meta and it becomes the forced choice, game design-wise and gameplay-wise, I don't think this is a good direction or either a fun direction. So what we want,
Yeah, it's not healthy.
Now, of course, you're going to say that, and Twitch is about to fill up with people saying, but what about this ship? And what about that ship? And what about that ship that are currently OP and stuff like that? And the answer is, we'll get there.
Yeah, and that's the big thing about the balance is it's a continuous thing, it's moving, it's evolving all the time. And we can't tune 200 ships all in one go when we figure something out. So it has to come in steps, which is why we've done pass on the medium, as well. We've done the pass on the heavies. And then and that'll keep evolving, but we have to do it in pieces because we just, we can't move 200 ships at the same time.
And also it's more important for us to kind of move those.
Actually, you can. And here's how you do it, right? It's really not that hard. Let me show you how you can do a baseline. So if you were to imagine, this is ship number A, okay? This is ship number B, and this is ship number 3, okay? One is the Vanguard, for example, right? So this is the Vanguard. This This is the Hornet. And this would be, let's say, the arrow, right? Now, if the arrow moves, let's see here. The arrow moves this much distance in 1 second, and the Hornet moves the same distance with the same Gs in 1 second, and the Vanguard moves the same distance in 1 second. Okay? The deflection right here, is that enough if the Vanguard is in the center here? So I can move the arrow at, let's say, 500 meters, about a full 2 ship lengths per second. If I have the same 5 Gs, I can move a Hornet 3/4 of its physical size in 1 second. If I use a Vanguard and I move, I don't know, 10 Gs in 1 second, and I can only move about a fifth of the actual physical frame from one spot to the next, then what you have to do is you have to increase the acceleration on the larger vessel. Okay? You have to slightly increase the acceleration on the Hornet, and you have to decrease the acceleration on the light fighter. Okay? And then you tune the top speeds, because the top speeds dictate who can engage what at what time. Okay? All you have to do is multiply the size of the ship by the acceleration, and that's your algorithm. That's all you have to do, right? So Hornet, so this arrow might be sitting at, like, I don't know, 5 lateral Gs from its bottom strafe. Hornet might be sitting at 6. Vanguard will be sitting at like 11, right? Because the Vanguard needs that extra acceleration to be able to genuinely move its ass from position to position. But here's the thing. You don't have to give the Vanguard tons of lateral strafe. You give the Vanguard tons of main strafe and tons of bottom strafe, so it flies like an airplane, like how you would expect an interceptor. And you give the Hornet 10 Gs on its laterals, 10 Gs on its strafes, and mostly its Gs on its mains. And then you give the arrow pretty much almost symmetrical strafes on every direction, but a little bit more on its mains. So light fighters are much more maneuverable from any direction at any angle, but they have slightly less top speed than a Vanguard, because if the light fighter isn't able to capitalize on its position for the amount of time it has on target, then the larger vessel has the ability to slowly get out of the spot and come back around for another pass. Right? This promotes two things. One, it allows heavy fighters to have a chance in the larger scheme of things. And if you have another ship that's about this big, another ship that's about this big, then you just do the how many Gs is it necessary? Like, do I have to have in 1 second to be able to move the physical profile of my ship from one frame to the next? That's all it is. It's a size of ship to acceleration metric. That's all it is. So you take any ship in the game, you multiply the size of the ship by the Gs it needs to create enough deflection to move itself a whole ship length in 1 second, and then you put those Gs on the ship. That's it. And you tune heavy fighters as an archetype, you tune lights and mediums as an archetype, and boom, you've got your game. That's all it is. StarCitizen has always been balls in space. Okay? Whatever ball in space we have, it might be shaped like a triangle, it might be shaped like a weird octagon, one might be shaped like a giant throbbing thing, one might be shaped like an oval, one might be shaped like this with cool little things popping out the side. Whatever the case may be, it's a ball in space, and it's moving in any direction it wants, points its nose wherever it wants. That's all it is, right? So the idea that they come up with, we're like, oh, 200 ships, it's so hard. It's really not. It's really not. This has been the metric for space games since 1980, since Asteroids. So to me, it's like, that is an excuse. It is an excuse that CIG is giving us. So whether they don't understand this, or they're unwilling to understand it, or they're just not wanting to test this for whatever reason, I will never understand, right? But I mean, to me, it's so simple, because as an active pilot that flies StarCitizen constantly, you know, once you start to see these things, it just makes so much more sense. You're like, oh, that makes sense, right? Again, you can have high top speeds on light fighters so that they can catch the constellations of the world, but the Connie should have tons of main thrust. There's no reason a constellation shouldn't have some huge main thrust. I mean, you've got 4 engines. Half of the ship is an engine. Literally, half of the Connie is giant engines, and you're telling me that thing can barely move its ass? Come on. You know, you don't got to give it tons of thrusters on every side of it, but you got to give it some huge main thrust. Why can't we have some like the Expanse type gameplay with these bigger ships? So that if I want to slow down really quickly, I flip and burn the other way and use my main thrusters like we did in the previous model. To me, it just makes sense. You know, it feels good. It adds skill. It allows people to express different things about their ships. But to me, this would take me an afternoon to get all the numbers for all the ships and send it to CIG. It would take me 1 afternoon. You multiply the size of the ship with how much G's they need to move an entire ship's length in 1 second at about, let's say, 650 meters, which is the optimal range for gunplay, right? So you do that 600 meters for all ships, and you tune and tune and tune, right? And then once you get to size 3 ships and above, then you don't got to worry about adding tons of main, like side thrust or any of that stuff, right? You've got to give them tons of main thrust. That's what you need. And you got to make it so that fighters, little tiny ships that fly around and try to peck at them, can only engage them from 1,000 meters, because then the turrets on these larger vessels have a fair chance at applying damage to the small stuff that's orbiting them, because the bigger ship isn't trying to get into a rate fight or do anything like that. The bigger ship is trying to make it very dangerous, that anything that gets close to it is in trouble, right? This will allow fighters to have a healthy interplay between larger ships and smaller ships, and it'll stop it from making it so that anything outside of that, I guess you could say, influence, or that sphere of influence, because like Yogi's talking about, oh, we need flak cannons to be able to engage anything that's, you know, basically above 600 meters. And my opinion has always been, drop the distances, the weapon distances on fighters. They shouldn't have more than 1,000 meters. The fact that they have 3,000 meter ranges is ridiculous. Of course you're not hitting a fighter at 3K. You know, and if people say, well, it's not realistic, that and that. Look, lasers dissipate after 1,000 meters, and the plasma just, you know, dies to the void because they can't power the lasers strong enough. You can have some reason, or you know, ballistics auto detonate at 1,000 meters because the Navy decided that's how they want to do all their NATO ammo or whatever. So to me, it's so obvious. It's so obvious to me, but that's how you do it. Like, that's how you do it, you know? And then obviously power management just adds those different dynamics to engagements and allows it to be more of a skill check. But them saying it's going to take us weeks and weeks to get it all right and all that stuff really doesn't, man. If they followed this simple algorithm, they'd have numbers that they could apply to the game within a few days, and this would get 95% of the way there, and everything else at that point would be tuning for specific ships to make things a little different, to make things a little more unique to each ship, but it would get most of the way there. And you'd have most fighters able to be viable, which is what people want. I think people all agree that some ships are better. Like an Aurora is probably not as good as a Mark II-A Hornet. I think nobody's going to argue that it should be the same. But this way, it would allow there to be a chance so that those fighters could have a good interplay. Right? And if you get rid of all the ridiculous speed walls everywhere you're bumping into, within 2 seconds you're hitting a speed wall here, hitting a speed wall here, hitting a speed wall here with master modes. Like, get rid of those speed walls, extend the zone in which we can play so that real flight geometry can really start making a comeback, you know? And, you know, they said that they're going to add a asymmetrical flight zone, which I think is really healthy. So your ship sits right here in the center. Okay, you can go about, let's say, 600 meters per second that way, and only about 350 meters per second in reverse. So while you're tumbling through space fighting, if you spin around, so you make a lot of movement in this direction, then you spin around to try to shoot, you're going to go from a ball that looks like this as you tumble down that movement. And as you turn around, the ball is going to reverse. You're going to hold your momentum in this direction. And you're going to find that if you kept your nose forward, you would be here. But because you spun around, you're now sitting at the edge of your speed wall, which is already at 450. It's going to slow you down so that you can only backpedal at 450. And the chasing craft is going to be able to close distance on you. Right? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. This was the only solution they needed for the old flight model, and then a little bit of jerk, and they would have been fine. But instead, we're going around in circles and we're reinventing the wheel. But it's fine. At least CIG is starting to, make a little sense. That doesn't make sense in space. Well, Danny, unfortunately, you cannot have a space model in StarCitizen where there are no speed limits, because you would have fighters traveling at 10,000 meters per second, okay? And they would just rip past people at ludicrous speed. And personally for me, I think that would be freaking awesome and be super cool, and we could do some really awesome stuff with that. It would make for way too simulation-based gameplay. So they have to have a speed wall somewhere. It has to happen. Because if you don't put a speed wall in, then all the kids are going to take their bumper cars and they're going to fucking fly off in the middle of nowhere, and everyone's going to get upset and they're going to say this game is too hard. They're not going to sell ships and the game will die. Right? So they need to create a safety net for people that have low IQ. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. They have to create a safety net to facilitate cinematic gameplay so that Chris Roberts can get his Hollywood experience without actually needing to learn how to be a pilot, right? And I say that a little bit disparagingly. I'm not trying to be a prick here, but the intention for StarCitizen has always been to make a Hollywood game and not to make the next best space sim ever. That was just not true, right? Because when StarCitizen was being designed, it was being designed based off of the assumption that in the 90s, games like X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, Freelancer, all those games, which were nothing close to a space sim, but were called space sims at the time. Chris took that term because that's what he grew up with and said, we're going to make the best space sim ever. Everyone took him for making an actual space sim, and instead we got Asteroids in Space 2026, right? And that's fine, but people have to calibrate their enthusiasm as to what to expect, right? So we're going to have speed walls. We're going to have things in the way to stop us from going outside these speed zones, because if we don't, then the majority of the audience is going to be slipping, sliding every which way to Sunday. And it's just going to be too difficult to create a DCS in space type experience, even though personally for me as an expert pilot, I love that stuff. I can understand that the general audience doesn't have the time to literally become a real pilot and just start, it's just not going to be accessible to the masses. So we need those speed zones. Let's continue on. Hey folks, thanks for watching today's video. Stay tuned for part 2 as we dive deeper into this conversation that CIG has about the new flight model. I know that it can be long, some of these videos, so I wanted to break this up into 2 parts so that I could put more memes in there. But thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, stay tuned for part 2. And also come see us on stream at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on YouTube and Twitch. And also stop by our Discord and check out our Foundations playlist to help you get started with everything PvP. I'll see you out there.